this Tuesday, July 27th. And let's go straight to Australia with Peter McGuire, CEO of XM Australia. Peter, good morning, good afternoon to you. It seems the market might be following the same trend as last week, but maybe not as dramatic, where we started the week with a fall, and we've now seen the market open in Asia this morning a little bit higher. Is this a market looking for direction, do you think?
Well, good morning, Sean. Good morning, panelists, and good morning, world. Greetings from Sydney. Yeah, you know, we saw that big sell-off yesterday, and it's again consisted of a fairly heavy sell-off as far as Hong Kong. I'm just looking here in China, Sean. Australia's up 0.5%, but we've got a couple of hours till the rest of the market closes. Philippines up 2.5%, so it's very, very strongly bid up. US markets were, this morning when they closed our time, were in the positive territory. The overall momentum to equities is just nothing short of astounding. Every week it just gets stronger, and every month it builds on all-time highs. So we've got NASDAQ hitting a benchmark. We've got Dow Jones just went through a benchmark of 35,000, and we've got 4,500 handle for the S&P, now closing in on that at warp speed. So overall, very, very strong, Sean, and things are positive tone to the upside for US and a lot of the other equity markets.
Let's leapfrog over to Fort Lauderdale in Florida, where Randall Mohammed is not on the beach because it is quite early in the morning. Randall, former VP of Energy Solutions at Ahart Solutions International. Randall, so much of this market now seems to be propped up on the recovery in the US, which is it just seems to go from strength to strength. Is that a warranted confidence for the build this market on the US outlook?
Hi, Sean. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. You know, Sean, I think the Fed is caught between a rock and a hard place. You know, in one hand, you've got the Fed saying, look, we've got to prevent the economy from stalling. On the other hand, you've got this battle with inflation, right? You know, inflation is pushing upwards of 5.4%. And my personal view is that if the Fed isn't careful, we could see double-digit inflation rates. You know, as you know, the Fed embarked on this $120 billion per month asset buying spree. And thus far, there's no tapering. There doesn't seem to be a decision to taper those buying of assets. And I personally believe that the Fed really needs to have a hard look, and they need to make that decision at least by Q4 to begin to taper the asset buying. I would not suggest that they go for increasing interest rates just yet, because unfortunately the variant is rearing its ugly head. So that is kind of weighing on the Fed as well. But other than that, what we are seeing is massive spikes in used car prices. We are seeing spikes in hotel prices, and we are seeing spikes in housing as well. Now, obviously, one could argue that, look, the average man doesn't need to buy a used car, does he? So what really affects the American people, the man on the ground, really is predominantly food prices, and you know, when I look at the increase in food prices, it's just around 2% increase. Of course, you know, there's this question of, is the inflation transitory? I think people are sort of fed up now of hearing this word, transitory inflation.
Well, it's certainly the one the Fed has been selling for a while, and we'll keep flogging it, I think, until somebody slaps them in the face with some real, new reality. Let's go across to Europe, where it's all a little bit more sober. Andrei Belyi, professor, founder and CEO of Balesene. Good morning, Andrei. Let's just start first, Andrei. I'd welcome your thoughts from a Russia perspective, Eastern Europe perspective, on the OPEC Plus agreement. Do you think Russia came away from that happy in the end? They got an extra 500,000 barrels on their quota from April next year. They seem to be the winner without doing very much.
Good morning, and yes, indeed. I mean, the OPEC Plus was very welcomed, and it seems that it seems that Russia got what it wanted. As I think I mentioned it at last time when we spoke. It has been already increasing the production rates, so it kind of backed Saudi Arabia from political stance, from political viewpoint, but the production rates were increasing. So it's normal that actually Russia found itself in a good position to see that actually now this production rate increase is actually legalized by the OPEC Plus agreement.
Does Russia have the capacity to reach those levels? I mean, beyond bringing, the 400 a month for the next 9 months, perhaps, and then they get an extra 500 on their quota. Many countries won't even be able to reach their new quotas soon. Some are already failing to do so. Is Russia going to be able to reach those extra levels, do you think?
It seems so. And obviously, smaller players, including bigger one, Lukoil, the biggest private company in Russia, they're all happy to see that there is a possibility to increase their production. They have been waiting for. So I would be positive on that.
Peter, just picking up on the points Randall made, the Fed outlook, I mean, it might be the biggest road marker this week to give the market some firm direction. It seems to me a kind of a balance. They're fighting how to manage an orderly exit from the movie theater without screaming fire. Your thoughts on what you expect?
I think the fire, Sean, there, everyone's got, maybe their hearing aids aren't working, but they've been yelling fire for many, many months now as far as that inflation. And when you're hearing Randall say that, that's really hit me in the guts. I say that boldly. For any man to sit there in Florida and say double-digit inflation, that's a man on the street I have a great degree of respect for, that says that. That's frightening, Sean. That is absolutely frightening, that we've got free money, we've got negative interest rates, and we've got an inflation target. We're saying a real inflation. We had 0.7% month on month last month and a double digit. That is catastrophic. So yes, they're yelling, Sean. Maybe the hearing aids have got to be with a couple of new fresh batteries for everyone, and certainly for the Fed to appreciate it, but it's not going to end without a lot of tears.
Where do the consequences, do you think, Peter, if the Fed gets this horribly wrong? At the moment, everybody would sort of seem to feel they're at the beach eating popcorn in the U.S., that the consequence for Asia, if we do get into a quicker than expected tightening cycle?
Well, I think first off, you're going to see, I think, precious metals will make a very, very strong move to the upside because of the risk factor, which you normally wouldn't get. I think with the rising interest rates, and the US dollar will probably go on a big tear to the upside, maybe a 95, 96 handle. There's the first part. I'm not sure how energy prices play. We're talking about you need wages to really ratchet up quickly, and that's going to put a lot of dampener on economic performance of a lot of companies, because if you've got 10% less spending power in your wallet, I'm noticing it, Sean, and I say that humbly. I go to the supermarket and buy food and feed the family. I can't believe what I used to get and what I do get now, all in 6 months. So that's Australia for you, and the cost of food is just out of this world. So,
Randall, going back to the street in the U.S., Randall, we don't seem to be hearing or seeing, at least, people on the street making issues with this level of inflation, if indeed it's kind of rising to that. We see in other parts of the world expressions of dissatisfaction with COVID lockdowns and other things, and people actually getting animated in that way as they do social unrest and so forth. The U.S. seems to be rather blasé. Everything seems to be rather well, and vaccination rates very high, are getting higher every day. Your thoughts on where the tension may emerge around this issue?
Well, Sean, look, that's it. It's a good point. The thing is, yes, we've got the variant, this Delta variant rearing its ugly head, but truthfully, I really don't see the US going back into any kind of lockdown. I think if the US moves to any kind of lockdown, I think you're going to see pockets of agitation, right? That's the first point. The second point is that the lawmakers are saying that the federal government and state government can mandate vaccination for their employees. So in other words, it's not unlawful to have federal and state employees vaccinated. So I think we're going to move towards that before we go to even a mask mandate, which I don't foresee. But the other issue, Sean, that we have to be on the lookout for is whether come July 31st, there's a deadline for the government to up the debt levels. And I'm not
debt
sure
as in the sovereign debt rather than death as in the COVID yucky death. Yes,
correct. They need to increase that debt level to avoid the government from defaulting on their debt obligations. Now, I'm not sure if a lot of people are reading into this, but that can cause a catastrophic economic crisis if they don't act quickly. So look, Sean, there's a whole lot of macro economic issues that are brewing. On the energy side, of course, gasoline prices are still averaging around $3 per gallon, which is not high, but it's not low either. But I expect some kind of easing as oil prices begin to fall a bit. But generally, it's going to be around that $3 mark.
And has been for a while and will probably continue through the summer as everybody stays out in their cars. Dr. Andrei, looking at the European story, of course, maybe one of the big items on the list since we last talked, the OPEC Plus we touched on last time, but the deal around Nord Stream 2, it seems ultimately this is now an issue that's going to be parked in the history books and will move forward. Your thoughts on how that was sort of resolved, the outcome, what does it look like?
Well, it's a big win for Germany, a big win for Merkel. Germany proved that there is no way to conduct an economic war against Germany. And the German authorities, business, as well as Merkel, persisted in their willingness to get Nord Stream 2, even though there are a lot of criticism, and despite all this criticism and despite also American pressure, they convinced the United States. It seems also that part of the German win is related to the Biden's administration behavior itself, because I would guess that Trump would have still conducted an economic war against Germany, and Biden, on the contrary, is careful and would like to rebuild the transatlantic relations, which were actually broken under Donald Trump. So I see it in this way, and some would even perceive a general approach of the new American administration towards international relations, including the withdrawal from Afghanistan, including the Nord Stream 2 agreement. So it's kind of like different units in one chain, yeah? And that's definitely how it's perceived in Europe. And it also means that both Brussels and Berlin need to take more responsibility at international arena.
Peter, looking at the sort of story in Asia, of course, we all operate with the narrative that China leads the whole juggernaut forward. There's been some question marks of uncertainty about China's economic health. I mean, this obviously we debated earlier in the week the idea that, okay, we're in a rebound, not a recovery, and the rebound in China has played out as it is 3 to 6 months ahead of the rest of the world. And so the rebound now being over, we're kind of into a China growth story that is a little bit deflated as compared to what was before. Your thoughts on that narrative, the idea that the rebound in China is over and it's now settling into a lower growth path, and we may follow that in the rest of the world. Your thoughts?
Well, I'd have to agree with that, Sean. And the narrative is very, very simple to understand. We've had such a solid move to the upside in the last 9 or 10 months for all equity markets and consumption, and certainly where China has come out of the blocks at a record pace as far as the recovery from COVID. So no economy just keeps on growing at a parabolic. There's a point in time, that inflection point or an exhaustion phase. And at the moment, I think that China is entering that exhaustion phase where, its equity markets are starting to level off. You're seeing domestic consumption. Also the issues as far as what's going on with debt levels internally. You put your mind back to the Jim Chanos, the shadow banking, all of those issues that have probably get re-emerged. We understand China's rhetoric over the last, say, 2 or 3 weeks as far as loosening of credit for their banks. So they'll try and pull whatever lever is necessary, but it also comes down to debt levels of the consumer and how the economy rolls forward over the next, say, 4 to 5 months leading up to Christmas, Sean.
Does that feel in Asia beyond China? Is there an awareness that the recovery is stumbling? Is there awareness that the vaccination rates are very low? I mean, is there a suitable action to correct these? What are your thoughts on that? From this distance, it looks a little bit muted.
Yes, well, it does. And we don't get clear numbers as far as the vaccination rates. So there's a little bit of an unknown. I don't see them heralded from the newspapers to tell me what the situation is there in China. So it's very much a closed shop, the first part of it. The second part is economic health. If I'm looking at, the markets on a whole, they've been very, very shaky all year. That they haven't broken out of those February highs that we saw for the Shanghai Composite. We're well back under 3,500. Whereas, that was in the 3,700 mark. So they haven't continued that upward drive that we've seen very evident across the US markets. So you would have to say, if you're looking at the economic health from the equity market standpoint, they're, 15% off their highs that they had, in February of this year, Sean.
Randall, we've seen, obviously, in Asia, the Delta variant emerging most spectacularly in India, but also impacting other countries where vaccinations are quite low, even in Australia, comparatively, for such a developed country. And Europe also struggling with the resurgence of the Delta variant. How is it playing in the US? We saw overnight the US government close down flights to Portugal and Spain. What are other issues revolving around the Delta variant, or is it a non-issue in the US?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a non-issue, Sean, but you're correct on the international flights. When I looked at the mobility chart for the US in particular, international flights were way down. So international flights were really at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to mobility. So there definitely is going to be a lot of constraints. On
that note, just a little anecdote. My brother flew from Chicago to Ireland recently, a week or so ago. There was 5 people on his flight.
Exactly. So that doesn't augur very well for oil demand. The other thing too, Sean, is that there's a lot of talk of shale. What's going on with shale? Is shale going to rebound? Is shale recovering? We see the rig count incrementally increasing every week, but the production level not so much.
Absolutely.
I think 11.2 million barrels per day, very incremental. But I think the takeaway, Sean, is that $30 billion in free cash flow. That's the real takeaway from shale. And Sean, I take my hat off to those guys. They had a plan. The plan was to hunker down. The plan was to reduce costs. The plan was to repay shareholder capital. I think these guys have done a tremendous job. And I think as that free cash flow begins to build and they begin to repay the shareholders, I think you will see even a sort of a faster rate of recovery in shale. not now, but probably second half of next year, you're going to see this resurgent as the money begins to flow.
Well, I kind of had OPEC Plus and the Saudi energy minister as the top story of the year, nearly, this discipline, this impressive performance. But I'm now thinking it's actually the shale and the major producers in the shale patch and how disciplined they have been in not spending money and just making loads of money on the back of the OPEC move. Andrei, your thoughts on Europe? We're still in this sort of now moving deep into the summer. Where is the summer boom in Europe? Is it there? Is this travel certificate that is permitting all Europeans to move around working? What's the outlook for that?
Well, the outlook is that actually is another lost summer for the touristic sector, and it's another lost summer for the aviation sector. Although the situation is way better than it was last year, it's still not up to the levels, and let's say the southern Europe is still without tourists. The touristic side is still very empty. So I think it's still a long way before the real recovery. And the Delta variant is actually accelerating. There is a risk of third wave, which, for instance, is already observed here in the Baltic states. And there are also rates which are growing up on the western side of Europe. So,
how advanced is the vaccination campaign in the Baltic states?
I think it's about 30% rate. But it's
because I saw recently Ireland was able to get 1 million Pfizer vaccines from Romania because Romanians were not taking up the vaccine.
Could be. I won't comment on this.
I mean, generally in Eastern Europe, is there a vaccination hesitancy, or there's a big reception?
It's more hesitancy rather than big reception. And also the availability at some point was not up to the level.
Right, yeah. Let's go to the survey question, give everybody in the room a chance to sort of weigh in on this. Rather simple idea, vaccine versus Delta, which will win? At the moment, we've seen the oil markets in a bit of a tug of war between vaccine optimism and the Delta variant, and the market is essentially caught between these two, rock and a hard place, if you like. Which will win to allow this market to break higher, vaccine or Delta? I mean, in the relative immediate future of the third quarter. Delta being a bit bearish, vaccine being a bit more bullish. Peter, your thoughts looking ahead now for the week? We're seeing the market open, ultimately up in Asia this morning after declining yesterday. We've got the big Fed meeting tomorrow. Do you expect direction? Do you expect clarity? Do you expect the Fed to finally step off the don't look to me for answers posture?
I think don't look for me for answers, Sean. That's what I'm thinking. I think it's the inflation story is going to be one that they'll look at very, very closely. I think the economic recovery is, you can't argue with the numbers. You can't argue with the non-farm payroll numbers coming out each first Friday of each month. You can't argue with the overall momentum and the unlocking of the economy. So there's the good side of it. The other side is, when do they start looking at, and that's why that point, as Randall said, when do you take your foot off the throttle and stop the 120 billion a month, that taper talk, and what impact does that have to markets? And when New Zealand, they say, is going to be off the first cab off the rank in the next couple of months as far as a rate rise, the way it's going, does America follow suit, and do we see something by end of year? Because that's going to be, you've got that asset price appreciation. They're conscious of that as well. Housing prices and real estate going through the roof. So they can't let it run wild forever, Sean. The recovery has been so incredibly baked in as far as price, then cheap money is creating this bubble.
Randall, the sort of fuel to the fire of this equation is that this week we could have a deal on this long-awaited infrastructure bill. It looks like the Republicans and the Democrats are finally sort of coming to the line, given they all want to go on holidays themselves. What are your thoughts on the outlook for that and its impact into this general narrative of the Fed facing a tapering question?
Yeah, look, Sean, that's definitely on the table, but between me and you, I think the Fed, I think they have a lot more other issues to worry about. You know, you've got, as Peter mentioned, you've got an economy that's overheating. You know, we saw hyperinflation. I mean, I would never think that hyperinflation and the US economy would be in the same narrative, but we have seen hyperinflation in a few of the months. So look, you know, this inflation thing has to be brought under control. I would like to see the Fed step off the accelerator, begin and taper back on that asset buying. In fact, I would like to see the Fed go to reverse repos to really suck a lot of that liquidity out of the system. And then, of course, come July 31st is when that deal on the debt ceiling expires. So,
why do you think ultimately the Fed are not proceeding with what does seem and has been for a while the inflation, the economy, the sort of medicine has worked? Don't kill the patient with too much of this medicine. Why do you think the Fed is still really holding back from that posture? What are they seeing that is still of such great concern to them? Unemployment still 7-8 million people haven't had their jobs back. What is it?
Yeah, I mean, unemployment is one issue, but you know, part of the narrative is, look, if we can ramp up vaccinations, and you know, I have to say, Biden is pulling out all his stops for vaccination. He's, you know, they're encouraging celebrities, and they're doing this and doing that. So I give him kudos for that. Part of the narrative, Sean, is getting kids back into school. Now, if we can get those kids back into school, it means those parents can get back to work. So that's one part of the equation.
It seems to me like everything is through the gateway of vaccination. It's the only sort of the firewall ultimately from this Delta variant.
Well, Sean, you know, very early in your show, we said it. We said, look, you know, we said the end game has always been the vaccination. You know, that was going to be the end game. And we've gotten here. I think we've done a good job. I mean, I only could speak for the US at this point in time, but unless we get the world vaccinated, it's going to be pockets, you know.
The next Delta variant that might come from the world that is unvaccinated. India gave us the Delta variant, and who knows what we'll get next from places that are still struggling. It might be a variant that is not is put off by the vaccination. Dr. Andrei, let's give you the last word this morning, get the poll result in, and see where we're at. The vaccine is going to win out. There's lots of optimism there, but there's a big world out there that is by far not vaccinated. Much more of the world population is not even near a vaccine as compared to those of us that have been privileged to already get one. Needs to become a much bigger priority at the G20, G7 level. Dr. Andrei, your thoughts for the rest of this week?
Oh, it's an interesting one. Of course, I would say it's a very tight battle between the vaccine and the Delta variant. We cannot know, as you rightly pointed out, whether new variants would emerge and whether the existing vaccines are able to contain them. But I would still keep a slightly optimistic note to say that, well, there is still a recovery compared to the last year, and there is still a sense of an overheating economy in many sectors, including growing demand for hydrocarbons. Even coal started to revamp in Germany, in China. So I would say the two trends are together somehow, and the financial worries which were mentioned by Randall, they contribute to the gold price. Yeah, so they contribute to the gold price, and the gold price is usually bullish for oil. But that having said, the price is up, and the costs are also up.
We're having a counter-intuitive, counter-cyclical outcomes. It strikes me that Europe could deliver some clarity on this issue in the coming weeks because it is the geography, it is dealing with very high infection rates of the Delta variant, but it's also got very high vaccination rates, the UK being probably at the forefront of that. How these economies navigate high infection and the vaccine, will the vaccine wall hold, and will these economies open up schools, universities, etc. in the coming weeks? That's going to be a big indicator as to where the rest of the year goes. So well worth watching, particularly the UK, where it does appear, at least temporarily, that the infection rates that we've seen climbing dramatically in recent weeks have flattened out and might be coming off, even though nothing's changed. The opposite, everybody's gone out, everybody's gone to the restaurants. So that will be a real indicator for optimistic outlook. Hence, maybe the vote in this room this morning that the vaccinations will trump. Peter, thank you so much for joining us from Australia. Andrei, of course, from Eastern Europe. Randall from Florida. All the best. Have a great day. We'll catch up with you over the coming days. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.